finally, we are finally doing the second episode of All About the Gear. I feel like an episode of Lost or something where everything is like conspiring against us to do the show, but yet we persevere. What's going on? Why couldn't we
I,
get the show?
I don't know. I think maybe it's a challenge, and they want to make the world wants to make sure that we really want to do this, and that we're prepared.
I know. It's like I kind of feel like the gods on Mount Olympus are up there and they're like, you know what? How about I kill Frederick's internet today? Let's see.
We're going to make them work for it.
We're gonna make it work for it. But all right, man. So let's kick this thing off. We're doing all about the gear number 2, right? Episode
Right.
number 2.
Episode number 2
Okay,
number
so I'll
one,
just
number
do.
one was our pilot. This is our first official episode.
Yes, and we've got Borrow Lenses. Our friends over at Borrow Lenses are on board. So I'm going to talk about that during the show. So
Yep.
I'll do the intro and then we'll jump right into it.
Okay.
All right, here we go. And I'm winging this intro.
I'm winging the whole show. Come on.
All right, here we go. All right, welcome back to episode number 2 of All About the Gear, featuring the guy that's on the hot seat to talk all about the gear, and that's Doug K. By the graces of our good friends over at borrowlenses.com, who have agreed to feed Doug's gear addiction with an IV drip of gear of things for him to test. The things that he's been testing over the past couple of weeks, or I think a week or so, right, Doug? At
Yeah.
least 2 weeks.
A week and a half.
Yeah, has been some gear that most of us don't own and may not own, and that's some of the Leica equipment that we're going to talk about. So we're going to dive into Leica in general, and what's the mystique about Leica, and does it make sense for you to be forking over that much money, and how much is that much money? All that stuff. So we're going to talk about that in this episode of All About the Gear. Doug K is here. So Doug, let's just jump right into it. What do you have? What do you have this week to play with?
Okay. I started out with the Leica M9, which is a camera from back in 2009. It was first released with a pair of lenses, and then with the help of Chris Chabot over at Snapsation, I was able to get my hands on an M240, which is the most recent M camera, and we'll talk about both of those. And another 50 millimeter lens. But this is what I've been playing with for the last week and a half, and I've had a lot of fun. I can tell you that it has been one of the most challenging gear reviews I have ever had because the conclusions are very, very hard to draw.
Okay, I want to dive into that. I have a feeling because this, like most good interviews that I feel like I do, they're rooted in stuff that I actually want to know, and I really want to know about this particular camera and the Leica brand in general. It sounds like you walked through some weeds in order to come to the conclusions you came to. So let's start with price.
Okay.
So this guy right here, if I was to walk out or go to B&H online or something and want to buy this thing, how much is it going to set me back?
Okay, well, the M9 you probably can't find except used, and this is about 4,500 used for the body only.
Wow. Okay.
The M2400 is, I'm sorry, the M240 is about a $7,000 body.
Wait.
So
It sounded like you said 7,000.
didn't it sound that way? Yes, I said $7,000 for the body alone for the M240. And remember, these are cameras that don't have autofocus. They don't have a whole sorts of things that you come to expect in most cameras, even point and shoots. But $7,000, and by the way, you can't actually get one from B&H. It's going to be back ordered for as long as 6 months.
Now, is that price just an exercise in marketing price perception, where you just you price it really high, and then only certain people that want the cachet of having been able to afford that and showing it at parties and photographer events would sort of benefit from that? Is that?
Well, you have hit on the overall important point of this show, perhaps. And we're going to get probably hate mail from both sides. I'm predicting more mail on this show than perhaps anything we've done on TWiP before. If you're a Leica fan, you of course think it's worth it because you shelled out all that money. I mean, remember, a starter kit for the body and a couple of lenses is going to set you back $20,000. Okay,
Jeez.
so this is we're talking about the Rolexes and the Ferraris of cameras here.
Yeah.
So if you're a Leica fan, of course it's worthwhile. It's not some marketing overpriced thing. For a lot of people who would disagree with that, said the stuff is way overpriced and you're basically paying Rolex prices for a watch that's no more accurate than a Timex.
Yeah.
So that's sort of what we'll be talking about through the course of the review. But it is for those who want to be able to turn off the show and go back to work. Here's the bottom line: the lenses are extraordinary. They are among the best lenses I've ever used. The bodies are a pain in the ass, but the combination of lenses and bodies give you a look that I don't think you can get with much other gear that's out there.
Okay, so what is that? What's that look? I want to get into the pain in the ass stuff, and understand that. But what's when you say the quality of the glass, or the quality of the images that you get out of that glass is different. What am I going to see different side by side with that camera with M9 with equivalent glass on another mirrorless type camera?
Well, that's a really good question, and there's something to consider, and that is lens sharpness is independent of the sensor. Okay, when a lens is sharp, it's going to be sharp on every sensor. For example, I put these Leica lenses on my Sony Nex-7 and my Nex-6, and they're just as sharp as they are on the Leica. So that's the first thing about these lenses is they are incredibly sharp all the way to the corner. Do you have that
same look? Do you have this? So when you put those lenses on your Sony, and you mentioned before that they have this look, did you get that same look on the Sony with the Leica lens?
No, you don't.
Okay.
And and this is why it was such a challenging thing. I'm pretty much of a geeky guy. I like specifications and technical this and that. So if you take this camera, the M9, and you go and you look at DxOMark and you look at their sensor ratings, this camera's sensor is one of the lowest they've ever rated for certainly lowest of a full-size sensor. Because let's point out one thing. This M9 is probably the first full-frame mirrorless camera. This is a mirrorless camera after all.
Yeah.
And it's already 4 years old. So there's all this excitement about mirrorless full frame. Well, this has been around for a long time. So anyway, the sensor is very poorly rated. I mean, you would look at this, you would say, well, why would I buy that? Because I can get almost anything that's rated better. But yet the look of the pictures doesn't correspond to those low sensor ratings, and it's caused a lot of heartburn for me because I have had to abandon the concept that sensor ratings are as important as I always thought they are. And that's one thing I recommend for our viewers is to take that into consideration. Sensor ratings are not all they appear to be. I get, for example...
Who are you looking to for your sensor ratings? DxO?
Yeah, DxO.
Okay.
DxO, that's where I go. And what do you get from this? Well, it's hard to describe. One thing is when you pull in the raw files from this camera, the raw files straight out of the camera look much better than what you're going to get from something like a Sony or a Nikon or a Canon. So what this leads me to believe is that the processor in the camera, the computer that's basically taking the data from the sensor and turning it into the DNG file, and these cameras use DNG as their native raw format, is doing stuff, because these images are more saturated, they are more contrasty, but yet everything you need is there. The full dynamic range is there. And in fact, if you look at those DxO ratings, it says this sensor should have bad dynamic range. It should be very poor. The black should plug up. The highlights should burn out when other sensors don't. But it's just not the case. You have really excellent dynamic range from these. So I can't answer the technical part of it. I can tell you that the stuff looks really good.
Okay, so then if you put an image that you captured with that setup right there next to a something that you get pulled out of your Nikon or something, and printed those side by side and did a blind test, would you, as having used the Leica for a week, would you be able to tell the difference between the two shots?
I would say yes, you certainly could tell the difference. I'm not sure you would immediately say, oh, this is the Leica, this is the Nikon. I mean, the D800, of course, has a marvelous sensor. I don't happen to own any Nikon lenses that are as sharp, for example, as this like a 28 millimeter. So
Mm-hmm.
on sharpness, it'd be tough. I shot some stuff to Golden Gate Bridge 2 nights ago, and I got pretty sharp with the 800. But these are, kick-ass sharp. I mean, they're just amazing. So
But are they $7,000 or that level sharp is what I'm getting to. Like,
well,
is it worth it?
yeah, well, it's the Rolex watch. It's the stereo speakers. What do you have to pay to get that last little bit of sharpness that you can't get for something more moderately priced? So
Hmm.
you're paying a real premium to get that last little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, the bottom line is, I'm not going to run out and get one of these cameras. I'm not going to pay for this. This is going back to Borrow Lenses. Thank you very much, Borrow Lenses.
Hmm.
But it's not going to be replaced in my thing. And part of that is, I honestly don't think I'm a good enough photographer that incremental difference is going to make the difference between me getting a shot I'm happy with and one that I'm not happy with.
So flip it on the side. So say you were on that trip and you just got back. Where were you? You were just
Turkey.
You're in Turkey.
Yeah.
So and you brought along your Sony Nex with you, and that was, and you wrote an article about how liberating it was to have so little gear, with you, aside from having big DSLRs and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to go back in time, not take the Sony with you, and take that kit with you, the Leica, what would you have sacrificed?
I would have had trouble with the rangefinder focusing in certain situations, so there are some shots I wouldn't have been able to get because of that.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have had a long lens, as it was. I took a 18-200 zoom with my Sony, so I wouldn't have had that zoom range. I might not have had some of the wide angle as well. Um, uh, other than that, I would have been able to get all the shots.
Other than not being able to get the shots I wanted, it would have been fine.
I would have come back with shots that were a little better looking, but I would have missed some shots if all I had done was taken the Leica kit. Now the Leica people are going to freak out again, but that's okay. I'll deal with those. I'll deal with them.
Yeah. So then, let's talk a little bit about the sensors that are in the M9 and in our notes here. We have the M240. What are the differences between the two? I want to get my brain around, because I don't understand the Leica world. Like, I don't understand the lens mounts. Because you mentioned earlier that you could take a Leica lens and put it on an NEX. Is it the same? E-mount. I mean, what's going on?
What's going on with the sensors? Yeah. First of all, it's a full frame sensor. The M9 and the M9P, which succeeded it, are about 18.5 megapixels, made by Kodak. They're CCD sensors, which isn't important, but it's an interesting thing, as you'll see in a minute. Mm-hmm. As I said, they're rated low by DxOMark, so don't even worry about that. They're one of those systems that does not have the anti-aliasing filter on the front, mm-hmm. And whereas on the Nikon D800E, I can't really tell the difference myself between the 800E and the 800 that does have the anti-aliasing filter. My guess is that not having it on this camera makes a difference in sharpness, simply because the lenses are so damn sharp.
Okay.
The ISO is interesting. This thing this first camera, the M9, you sort of don't want to go above ISO 800. It gets pretty noisy, and of course, mm-hmm. when you have a real sharp lens, the noise starts to defeat the purpose of having the sharp lens. The 240, which we'll talk about in a second, goes up another stop and a half or even 2 stops. It's a much better camera in terms of noise. So people are shooting with those at 1600 or 3200 and getting away with it. And again, some of the glass is real fast, so that helps a lot too. So that's sort of it on the sensors. Well, let me jump ahead and tell you a little bit about the 240 sensors here. That sensor, what they did is they switched to the CMOS sensor, which caused a lot of consternation, but they did a good job. And the 240 also has a 24 megapixel sensor instead of 18.5. So it's up there in that, what's now the middle range of sensors. It used to be the high range, right? But it's pretty good. And it's the 240 definitely has a better sensor. And since you can't get either one of them, you can't buy an M9 new and you can't buy a 240 new.
So why is that? I mean, why can't I go out, if I'm watching this right now, how come I can't just say, you know what, Doug, I'm sold, I'm in that market, I got some extra cash laying around from some good stock investments, I want to go get one right now? How come I can't go get one?
It's a waiting list. It's just a waiting list. They can't keep up with the demand. They tout them as being handmade, and if you watch the videos, you see the guy, painting the lettering on the camera. He's got his little brush and he's painting this and rubbing it off. So, to that extent, it's pretty.
So, in your opinion, do you think that demand is on purpose? Or in other words, the fact that these cameras, some of these bodies are what did you say, $7,500 or $7,000 plus? $7,000 for the body, which means the market for that is going to be like this, right? It's going to be very narrow.
Yeah.
Do you think, in your opinion, that Leica is doing that on purpose to play to the supply and demand scarcity tactic?
Well, I think they've chosen a production level, so they certainly want to make sure that they don't have any sitting around. They don't want to make them and not sell them, and they seem comfortable with the level that they've got. Certainly, having this kind of demand and the lack of supply adds to the allure or the mystique of the camera. But eventually, the supply will catch up with the demand, and it'll be fine. But right now, you beg, borrow, and steal. You find a dealer who's going to get one, and you do everything you can. And of course, there's nothing like a discount. Forget that.
Right.
But let's talk about the lenses a little bit. I think that because the lenses are really, there might be a certain mystique. Well, we'll come back. We'll talk about the body and the shooting experience. But let me cover the lenses a little bit because it's a very different world in Leica lenses than it is for other cameras. And I'm going to pull up my notes here because I can't keep it straight. First of all, the lenses, there's a whole range of lenses, and they have names. For example, there are the Summicron lenses. There are the Noctilux lenses. Actually, there's only one Noctilux lenses. There's the Elmarit series of lenses. These are names that actually just refer to the maximum widest aperture. All right. So, for example, the Elmarit lenses are f2.8. That's what I've got here on this one here. This is an Elmarit. Let me turn on the camera here. This is the Elmarit, which means f2.8. This is the 28 millimeter.
This is kind of cool looking. It looks like
it
looks like an enlarger lens almost.
Yeah, it does sort of. And it has this nice detachable hood, which for all that money you'd expect.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of the smallest that they make. This lens, I have to look it up here, is $2,200.
I knew you were going to say something like that.
Right, just for this little lens. Right.
Jeez.
Now, what's nice about these? I mean, first of all, this is sharp. Here's one way you know it's sharp. You bring something into Lightroom, and you go to the place where you go to the lens profile to correct for distortion.
Mm-hmm.
And with lenses like this, 28 millimeter, you'd expect to click on distortion correction and something would happen. Nothing happens. Because there's no distortion, right?
Yeah.
They're just beautiful. So the lenses, all of them, they have aperture rings because they just have a built-in aperture. They have a focus ring because it's manual focus only. They, of course, have the hyperfocal scale on there to show you what's going to be in focus for each aperture. And that's it. There is no image stabilization. There is no autofocus. So these are very simple lenses, very light lenses, very small lenses, and they are sharp and expensive.
We're talking brute force photography here without the benefit of technology. No, like you said, none of that auto stuff. It is f-stops, shutter speed, and I assume you can play with the ISO, right?
Oh yeah, you can. And they've actually made that moderately simple in the 240. It used to be more painful. So that's an example of a $2,200 lens, which is a little bit low end for them.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of their El Cheapo lenses. This is the Summarit M. This is a 50 millimeter. Summarit means f2.5. Okay, and in this case, I have to look it up. This is their discount budget line. This is $1,650.
A bargain.
That's a cheap Leica lens. And to be honest, I think even the Leica people, Leica fanboys out there would agree. This is actually not up to Leica snuff. This is not what I would call an uber sharp lens. I can see it's just not as sharp as the others. Now, again, thanks to Chris over at Snapsation, I was able to get my hands on a, let me look it up, a 50 millimeter Summilux lens. That's a 1.4 50 millimeter, which cost only $4,000. And
Jeez.
that was gorgeously sharp. I mean, it was a spectacular lens.
How are you
Big,
judging
big lens.
sharpness? I'm curious. How when you say a lens is sharp, are you like looking at the transition in light to dark contrast areas? Are you looking at detail and like eyebrows of people? Where how do you say something's sharp and not sharp?
That's a good question. And to be honest, working with these lenses has redefined sharpness for me.
Hmm.
What I do is I bring the raw files into Lightroom, and I go to 1:1 to look at it at a, basically one screen pixel equals one camera pixel.
Mm-hmm.
And a sharp lens, if you take a vertical line, it means it's going to be dark in one column of pixels and light in the one that's right next to it. I mean, it is to the point where the sharpness of the lens is as sharp as the sensor can get it. And again, if you put even just an anti-aliasing filter in front of that, you'll get some blur from one set of pixels to the next. And these lenses, certainly with the M9 sensor, are as sharp as this sensor could possibly be. And even with the 240, which has a greater pixel density, they're that sharp. So you don't have to worry about looking at eyebrows and eyelashes and things like that. You can look right at the pixels and say, damn, that thing is sharp. So again, I don't own any. I own about a dozen Nikon lenses, and I don't have any that are this sharp.
Yeah.
So
How
I
was
mean,
it?
it's
Just before we
crazy.
continue, how was it
Yeah.
shooting with that? With this is a rangefinder, and you're wearing glasses, so you're looking through glass, and then some glass, and then some glass, and then you see the subject. Does that affect the way that you shoot using the
Oh yeah,
rangefinder?
yeah. It does. It does. The All right. So let's go. Let me see. Is there anything else we got to say about the lenses?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I just got to see. So anyway, oh, and you can spend 11 grand on a Leica lens. And that's for, remember, they're all primes. There are no zooms made by Leica, right? The
Hmm.
Noctilux 50 mil f 0.95, right? Which means even if you can get one eyelash in focus, the one next to it won't be.
Wow.
Um, that is a $11,000 lens, all right? And it's
Yeah.
huge. It's huge because if you think about it, f 0.95 to get that much light into a full frame sensor means you've got some pretty wide glass on the front of that thing.
And that's just a lens.
That's
That is
just a
just
lens, yeah.
yeah. That's a car.
Yeah.
That's just
I don't even. For all I know, I haven't actually touched one. For all I know, you pay $1,000 just for the case that it comes in. I don't know.
wow.
Um, but remember that the lenses are small because they don't have image stabilization. There's no autofocus. There's also no electronic aperture control. Think about this. So there's no concept of shutter priority. You can do um, aperture priority. You can do manual, but you can't get shutter priority with these things.
Hmm.
But they're very sharp. All right. So the rangefinder experience, yeah.
Yes.
So that's the big. So the lenses, love the lenses. I'd actually consider buying a Leica lens for use on my Sony cameras. We'll talk about that in a minute.
I definitely
Um,
want to talk about that. Yeah. But go ahead.
and I've experimented with that. Okay, so the camera is heavy. This camera without the lens weighs as much as my D600, for example. All right. So here too doesn't really give you a sense how much bigger the D600 is, maybe from that shot, but the D600 is quite a bit larger. But the Leica M9 is built like a brick, and it is heavy, as heavy as the 600. So let me give you a look around here. First of all, there's this. It's so silly. There's a plate on the bottom, just like a film 35 millimeter camera. You
Yeah.
turn this, you open it up, and you see there's even like room for a film canister kind of thing here. You have to take off this bottom plate to get to the SD card, right? And the battery, which is here.
Well, you gotta remove that plate to
Yeah,
change to.
yeah. You
Oh,
got to take this plate off and drop it and lose it before you can get to the SD card that's in there.
tell me there's a USB port on there somewhere.
There's a USB port on there somewhere, right here,
Okay, good.
right? Which, yeah, there's the USB port tucked away in
Okay,
a little thing,
okay.
if you can see that. Um, okay, let's just look at it real quickly. On the back, the M9 has a crappy LCD. The 240 has a much better LCD. Um, It has very primitive menus, but they're good enough because the camera's primitive to begin with. You have a viewfinder for the rangefinder, no diopter control, so that's a problem. It means I have to wear my glasses. I can't take them off.
Okay.
Right? Has a standard hot shoe. It has an aperture dial, which includes an automatic setting. That'll give you essentially aperture priority mode.
Wait, is that an aperture dial or a shutter speed dial?
It's a shutter speed dial. Sorry,
okay.
It's a shutter speed dial with one option that says, let the camera pick the shutter speed in order to give you aperture priority, right?
Okay.
So you set the aperture for that. And then, of course, you've got off, single shot, continuous shooting, and self-timer. And I love this thing, which is the release cable is, like from the old film days where you screw in a physical
I still have some of those little plunger things, right?
Right. So they had to do that, right?
Yeah.
The M9 says M9 on the front. Let me do it that way. It says M9 on the front. The M9P, they took this off. They took off the M9. They took off the famous red Leica dot. Who knows why? There's a flash. I haven't used it. And then there's this little lever here, and we'll talk about that in a second. The rangefinder. And that is it. Okay.
Wow.
All right. So the rangefinder experience. So the rangefinder is a split image, which means as you focus the lens, there's a little cam in the lens that tells the body what's going on, and that will cause the rangefinder to simulate the focus of the lens, not in terms of the overall view, but in terms of this split image. So you basically have a center area in the viewfinder where you shift the focus, and it has two things that are split horizontally. You line them up. So you find some vertical part of your image, vertical line or something, and you focus until the upper and the lower parts are lined up, and then you're in focus. It's very accurate, but it's not easy to use because there are so many situations. For me, now, I've experienced manual focus for years in old Nikon Fs and things like that. I think I'm fairly good at it, but even after a week of shooting with this, I had troubles. There are many situations, like let's say you have a horizontally repeating pattern. Mm-hmm. So as you shift this, you're not sure if you're lined up on the right repeating object or not. Right. There are times you're trying to focus on a texture. You can't focus on a texture because you can't discern them in the viewfinder. There are tricks, you can turn the camera sideways for that horizontal problem. There are things you can do, but there are times when this is a difficult camera to focus. Now, the rangefinder, the Leica people will say that's a plus, right? They want the whole process of taking a picture to be more deliberate, and there's something to be said about that. But the fact is, focusing with a rangefinder is never going to be quite as good, let's say, as manual peak focusing on the Sony. So when I pop these lenses on the Sony, I get a much better manual focusing system.
Yeah. What about composition, Doug? What about the parallax or whatever between what you see through the rangefinder and what the lens is actually taking a photo of?
Yeah, they're compensating for that. So any lens that is 28 millimeters or tighter, you can see through the rangefinder viewfinder. So you can either go full, look at the whole rangefinder frame for 28 millimeters, or for tighter lenses, like the 50, you use lines that are superimposed in the viewfinder, and that works just fine. So okay. If you go wider than 28 with this camera, the M9, you have no choice. You're stuck. With the 240, you have the option of going to an add-on electronic viewfinder, and we can talk about that too. But which is a necessary evil, I think, with that camera, at least in some cases.
But that's only on the 240, though, right?
Only on the 240, right?
Okay.
So that's the challenge. I have no problem with the rangefinder. It's nice and bright. I like being able to see things well. There's a problem with mirrorless cameras like the Sony and the Olympus and so forth, which is when you stop them down, it actually stops down the light to the viewfinder as well. People don't think about that much. Our big Nikons and Canons, you focus them wide open and they don't stop down until you actually take the exposure.
Right.
Well, of course, the same is true with the rangefinder. You're not looking through the lens, so you can stop the lens down all you want. You can take, in fact, here's a great one. You can take this camera, you can put the lens cap on the camera, right? And you can go out and take the equivalent of a whole roll of pictures. You'll think you did great. You get back, you've got nothing because you're not looking through the lens,
Yeah.
right? And you don't realize that. So the
And
setting.
you actually did that by accident. That's what you're saying,
I
right?
did not, but I thought about what might happen, and I know people for whom that has been the case. So anyway,
Wow.
as you say, take the lens cap off.
Yes, always. It helps. Light entering the sensor actually helps.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm not a rangefinder fan. If they had put a diopter adjustment here on the viewfinder, I might have been able to, push my glasses up to my forehead and gotten in closer. But because I'm slightly back with my eye, I can't see the full 28 millimeter frame. I have to, look from side to side. I've got to do this, this, and turn it. I'm seeing the right side. I'm seeing the left side.
Oh,
I
that
have
would
to
drive
do
me
some of
crazy.
that kind of crap. So
Would it be better, Doug, if it had like the semi-electronic viewfinder, kind of like what the Fuji X100s has, where it's actually doing some heads-up data in there?
yeah, and that's what the 240 has. The 240 took the Olympus viewfinder, the one I think is from the Pen cameras, and they literally use that viewfinder. Um, and you can buy the Olympus. They don't make the Olympus version anymore, but you can buy them used on eBay, or you can buy the Leica equivalent. It's the exact same thing for a few $100s more. So there's an answer to your earlier question, right? About do they mark these things up?
Yeah.
That viewfinder gives you focus peaking. It gives you the ability to see the full view through the lens, including the wider angle lenses. So it's important for wide angle. It gives you the focus peaking, as I said, so it's better. But it's a pretty crappy viewfinder in terms of number of pixels, graininess of image, and so forth. You can compose, but you certainly can't appreciate your shots. And you do get some information in there as well. You get more data. In this, without that, in the M9, for example, all you see is your shutter speed and your exposure compensation. That's it. So,
Yeah, yeah. I think as I look at this and I'm listening to you and I'm running these numbers in my head, but and then I'm also running that past the fact that there's been a lot of really good photographers that swear by Leica, and have created work beyond what I'll ever dream of creating with those kinds of cameras. So I'm trying to reconcile like that and my techno lust for the mirrorless cameras of today with all these crazy bells and whistles and all that stuff in there. Like, does it make a person less of a photographer if they shy away, price notwithstanding? If I don't want to use a camera that is going to make me work as hard as that Leica is going to make me work, and I instead go to, an NEX5R or my OMD or something like that with which much more technology in it, does it make me a worse photographer or a less capable photographer?
no, I think that.
Good answer.
Yeah, I think yes, no, because you're always going to be a perfect photographer,
Yes.
Frederick, you in particular. But I think there is a lust and there's a curiosity, and that's why when we first started doing this show here, the first thing I wanted to do was get my hands on a Leica and say, what is this all about? And again, if you want to get this out of your system, go to borrowlenses.com.
Yeah.
Rent your dream system. It's like you're going to turn 40. Go rent the Ferrari for a weekend, right? Get it out of your system. Drive it fast. Don't hurt yourself, don't hurt the car, and then take it back. And you'll say, been there, done that, thank you, I feel great. And I was able to get that experience without having to go crazy in my own budget.
Yeah.
I was trying to think of metaphors. And I used to fly airplanes. And one of the things that the pilots of small airplanes do is they'll go out and learn how to fly a glider. And it's like going to full manual on everything, because let's face it, you don't have an engine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're very sensitive. So you sort of improve your skills in a glider because they amplify every mistake you can possibly make. Right? If your rudder control isn't good, they really, really make you look stupid. If you don't know how to judge how to make it to the runway, you look really stupid, right? Because you don't make it to the runway, right?
Yeah.
So to some extent, going and borrowing or renting a Leica for a week will make you feel stupid, but it will make your process more deliberate. In fact, I think that when I get rid of this camera next week and have to give it back, I'm going to be a somewhat better photographer because of the time I spent with this camera.
Yeah.
because it's made that process more deliberate. So that's, who knows? That's my
Would you
fantasy
say
anyway.
that, with that process, as people are learning photography, and because the borrow lenses is there for people to go grab whatever they want and play with it and send it back, would you suggest new photographers go grab one of these cameras to do that glider like unforgiving photography experience first as they're learning things and then transition into something with more bells and whistles on it?
I don't think so. I think I would recommend this for the more experienced photographer who's really going to be able to take advantage of the subtleties. I think it's, yeah, I think I'd turn that on its head from what you said, which is this, to appreciate what this camera can do. I think you need to be a better and better photographer. And as I said at the top of the show, the reason that I'm not going to go out and drop $20,000 on Leica gear, other than the fact that I don't have $20,000 to drop on Leica gear,
Yeah.
is I'm not sure I'm a good enough photographer for this to really make enough of a difference. So if if you're ready for the challenge and you think you're good enough that you're going to see the difference, get your hands on one.
Yeah. Well, look, I want to get back to that mount that you were talking about, because you sort of teased that you were swapping lenses back and forth. How are you able to do that?
Yeah. Oh, I have to do one more thing first, though.
Mm-hmm.
I hope you can hear this.
I hear a little
Wait a
click.
minute. Oh, hang on a second. Why is? Oh, I see. I got to turn the aperture here. Hang on.
It sounds like film.
Doesn't that? This is the wildest thing. So it sounds like shutter and film advance, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What they're doing is they're recocking the shutter, but they have, I swear, they have gone to all that trouble to make it sound like a film camera. Now, the 240 doesn't do that. The 240 doesn't have that sound, but I put that up and I took my first picture. I said, you got to be kidding.
That's like Tesla. That's like Tesla putting the electronic sound of hooves hitting pavement when you hit the accelerator.
Yeah, right, exactly, right. Or a little thing in the back going, yeah, with the whip sound.
Yeah, mule, yeah.
All right, so let's take a look at this. Here's a Sony Nex-7. Okay.
Okay.
Nice camera, costs less than $1,000. I love it. Here's we'll take the cheap lens. So here's the $1,300 50mm lens from Leica, and I'd like to be able to put them together. Oh wait, what have I got here? Oh wait a minute, I got to turn the camera on. There's the camera. So Sony NEX,
Yep.
50mm Leica.
Yep.
For the cost of this lens, I could buy almost two. I could certainly buy two NEX 6 bodies. Here's the secret sauce. $16. Would you put a $16 adapter on a $1,300 lens? We're about to do that. So you put this little puppy on there, and you put this little puppy on there, and now I have a 50mm Leica lens on a Sony Nex-7.
Wow.
And because there's no glass, there's nothing optical in that adapter, it has relatively little impact on the optics. The only issue is whether the spacing from the mount to the lens is accurate. And what happens is you find that you can actually focus slightly past infinity on this, and people freak out and think that's a problem. Well, as long as you can focus at least to infinity, you're okay. The fact that you can focus a little past infinity isn't really a problem.
Yeah.
So what do I get from this? Well, I get the sharpness of the Leica lenses. I've got the crop factor of the APS-C Sony. So even though it's a 50mm, it looks the equivalent of a 75 full frame lens.
Mm-hmm.
But I get focus peaking. I get beautiful focus peaking, which I can't get on that old camera here. I should have set this up in advance for you. But if I go to, in fact, if I had done this on my 6, I could get them more quickly.
And it's TTL. It's not viewfinder at all.
It's all TTL. That's all you got on this thing, right?
Yep.
So I'm used to using the 6. I can never remember how to do everything on this. Focus. No, we won't worry about it. But the fact is that you get the beautiful focus peaking that you're used to from Sony or Olympus or anybody who's got that in their cameras right now.
So with a little $16 adapter, you throw it on there, and then you just get that on what, Amazon or something?
Went to Amazon, made from China, sold and shipped by Amazon. I mean, it even came with a different brand name that it was sold under, right? I mean, it's got, I think it's one company that makes 3 different brands or something like that.
Yeah.
But I read the reviews, but it works fine, absolutely fine. The lens is firm; it doesn't wobble. It worked with all three lenses that I tried. Um, it
Who'd
has
want to do that though, Doug? I mean, is that adapter specifically for people that are I want to get an NEX, for example, in that example, but I've already purchased a bunch of Leica lenses and mortgaged my house and car, so I need to make these work on this newfangled camera, so I get that adapter.
Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, Zeiss is starting to come out with good lenses for these smaller cameras. We're just starting to see like a Zeiss 50 millimeter come out, a Zeiss 35 for the NEX line for the E-mount. Zeiss and Leica are sort of the classic competitors. They're both German companies.
Hmm.
Leica's always been a bit more expensive and then probably a little bit better for those who care. But before we had the Zeiss choices, if you wanted really sharp glass, you had to go to this combination. You had to go to Leica lenses with an adapter and a Sony body. If, for example, I mean, I might actually get, not this particular combination, but I might get a 50 millimeter f1.4 lens out from Leica and put it on this, because it would be gorgeously sharp. It would be beautiful. It would look like a 75.
Yeah.
And it would be, if I wanted to later on step up to Leica bodies, that would be a way to do it. And remember, the Leica body with the same lens is going to give me a very different look than what the Sony gives me. That's again, we can come up with adjectives all day long for what it is. But and someday maybe Leica's going to come out with an M mount body that gives me focus peaking in the viewfinder. I mean, if there was a built-in electronic viewfinder on a Leica body, you couldn't make enough of those cameras, even at $7,000 or $8,000. People
would you buy one?
I would probably buy that camera.
Huh.
At that point, if it had a good built-in EVF. But it has to be good. Next week we're going to be reviewing the Fuji X240, right?
I wanted to see that review. Well,
right?
actually, I'll be participating.
You'll be participating in it, right? So we're going to review this. I'm sorry, not X240. It's the X100s. Excuse me,
yes.
for getting all my numbers wrong.
Yes.
X100s, which has probably the best electronic viewfinder I've ever seen. So
that's a camera that I have been lusting after for like 6 months, and I still lust after. So we'll see. And that thing is in high demand as well, right? I mean, when I went to go get mine, unsuccessfully, obviously, you couldn't get it anywhere. I went into Sammy's in San Francisco, and they were like, "Oh, really? You and everybody else wants that camera?"
And it's been out for like 4 or 5 months. So that's
yes,
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I don't get it.
So we'll take a look at that. We're going to do that review next. But anyway, so this combination is going to give me, the sharpest combination I can get on this camera that I know of anyway. And I have not tested some of the new Zeiss lenses, so I'm not 100% sure if they're any worse. And it is a path for the person who thinks they might want to go to a Leica body in the future. That's the advantage. Okay.
It's a gateway drug.
Exactly. I could not have come up with a better metaphor than that.
It's what I do,
That's right. So let me just see if there's anything else that's important to say about these things. Like I said, it's much more of a deliberate process in the photography, and that helps a lot. It's that glider experience again.
Yeah.
The rangefinder can be very focusing. The camera, of course, is extremely unobtrusive. So Chris Chabot from Snapstation. By the way, let's put a plug in for Snapstation. If you're a photographer and you want to make some money and you want to find clients, go to snapstation.com. How's that for a plug? We'll do that.
Love it.
Chris.
Snapstation.com.
A good friend of This Week in Photo. It's unobtrusive. So here we're walking around the UC Berkeley campus, Chris and I. I've got a little Leica around my neck. He's got a Canon 1DX, right, with a 24-70, big camera, big lens. And we're walking around, and these two women come up. They want someone to take their iPhone picture, right?
Of course.
So who do they ask? They don't ask the guy with the little cheapy Leica. They ask the guy with the big Canon, right? So Chris is taking the picture of the women because he gets asked, but I get to take the picture of the women with the Leica. So I come home with the picture. So that's a clue right there.
Yeah.
The metering in both the 9 and the 240 is pretty bad. I'm not impressed with the metering at all.
How do you meter? What does that look like? What's the
It's got,
experience?
it's got, your typical metering like you have SLR. It's through the lens,
Hmm.
but it's just not a very sophisticated algorithm. You can easily fool it with backlight. If you move the camera a little to one side or the other, it swings wildly in terms of exposure. So I ended up getting my best shots with manual exposure, and I think a lot of Leica shooters do the same thing.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and there's not a lot of long glass available from Leica. I mean, the longest Leica lens is a 90 millimeter. There are other people who make M mount lenses that go longer than that.
So you're not taking that body out birding or to Africa to a safari to get a shot across the tundra of a lion or anything, right?
I'm sure there are people who do. They have longer lenses from other manufacturers, but also a lot of Leica people say, "I'm not taking my camera out in the desert." I don't no, I don't want to put it to that kind of a
You're
risk.
like, what are you kidding me? You know
Yeah,
how much
really.
this thing costs? What do you mean? Go take pictures with
Exactly.
it?
Let's talk a little bit about the 240 while I'm looking at my notes here. Um, it's got better controls because, for example, exposure compensation is much easier to get to than it is on the 9. I like the sensor. The camera's even quieter, higher ISO on the 240. We talked about that. It's got video, but it's pretty crappy video, so I wouldn't bother with that. And who takes an M9, or sorry, a Leica M camera out to do video? I mean, does that make any sense at all?
Doesn't make sense.
No,
Yeah.
no, I don't think so. The metering's a little better in that. Um, Boy, I almost had another metaphor. The mind is willing, but the body is weak. Whatever that phrase is. Well, the lenses
You're
are
on your
great.
own, man.
Yeah, right. The lenses are great, but the body is weak.
So
Uh,
what's the bottom line of the for this camera? I mean, you've said that, yeah, go rent it, that kind of thing. But give me two bottom lines if you can do that. The bottom
uh,
line for the person that is, like you and I, just the average person that likes photography and likes, to geek out on the tech and that kind of thing.
right.
Is this a must-have? And then the second bottom line is, if money is no object, you're flush and you're looking for the best. It's the best that money can buy, because you're going to sit it on your counter when your friends come by for cocktails and you want them to be impressed. Is this the camera for them?
Okay. If you're going to do street photography, if you're going to do even portraits, as long as you're not doing sports or action, where I think a rangefinder is a challenge, um, this makes a great camera. Again, if money is no object,
Mm-hmm.
it is. If you want to do, if money is no object and you're going to do those things like action photography, this is a great second camera or first camera, depending on your perspective. If you have like a lust, if you're the kind of guy who buys a Rolex watch, um, or the woman who buys a Rolex watch, let's be fair about that.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that you should try. You should get it out of your system, and you should go rent one from Borrow Lenses and try it, because you will never be satisfied until you do. As much as we've tried to do a good job in this review of explaining what the Leica experience is like, we failed. I can't describe what it's like to either shoot with this camera or look at the images.
You have to get it
Um,
in your hands, right?
you got to do it. And I'm glad I had the opportunity. I'm also glad that I'm not going to run out and drop $20,000 on Leica kit right now. But it's a different world. There's no doubt about it. The cult of Leica is real. And if, like I say, if they were to come out with one with a great electronic viewfinder, and I expect they will at some point in the future, I'm a candidate.
Yeah, but when you say at some point in the future, it's not like everyone else is standing still. I mean, you've got Olympus and Sony and Panasonic and Nikon and Canon. All these guys are innovating, hopefully, and doing cool stuff. Will it be too little, too late if Leica says, okay, finally we're gonna do that thing that those guys were doing?
You know what? Leica, we call this show all about the gear. With Leica, it's really all about the glass.
Mm-hmm.
It's the lenses.
Okay.
And, these lenses go back and work on the oldest M cameras, the M7, which was a film camera,
Yeah.
the M8, which was the first digital, And when they go to an M20 or whatever they do, or M500, that glass is still going to be the best glass I think you can find out there, and that's what it's all about. So it's just there's sensor magic. There's definitely sensor magic, but the glass will last forever.
All right. Well, give us a little tease to whet our appetite for the next All About the Gear episode. So you said it's going to be on the Fuji X100s. Give us a cliffhanger.
All right. Fuji X100s, best electronic viewfinder I've seen. Great sensor, maybe the best controls I've ever seen on any camera. I love that they've got the controls perfect in terms of what you need to. Good menus, but do you want to have a camera that has a fixed 23mm prime lens and nothing else? That's the big question. Is that going to be your camera?
And you'll answer that in the next show. And I know some people will say an emphatic yes, and some will say no. So yeah, I'm anxious to hear what Doug K says about that after taking it around the neighborhood.
That's what we're gonna do.
All right. Well, Doug, thank you, man. We despite the gods on Mount Olympus throwing thunderbolts at Comcast to try to foil this show, we've done it. That was All About the Gear episode number 2, and like Doug was saying, in the next episode, hopefully we'll get it out. I'm not even going to promise when it's coming.
No.
I'm not going to promise. I'm not going to tempt the fates. So the next episode, we're going to be talking about that Fuji X100s, and Doug is going to proceed to make me feel bad for not having one, probably.
Hey, wait a minute. I'm the one who talked you out of it.
You did. It's
my fault.
Yeah, cool.
That's before I had one. That's before I had one in my hand, so we'll see. Thanks again to BorrowLenses.com who make this show possible. And boy, I sure hope you remember to hit the record button, Frederick.
Oh, no. I forgot. Is that why it says record now up there? Cool, Doug. All right, this is perfect. So, Doug, where are you at online in case people want to say, who is this guy?
Oh, that's a good question, because I will eventually be putting this on the blog. You can find the blog at blogarithms.com. You can find the portfolio at dougk.com, and I'm all over Google+.
Awesome. Cool. All right, man. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Frederick.
All right, and thanks for everybody for, I hate saying tuning in. That sounds so old school. Thanks for watching this stream. All right, see ya.